The initial officers were seriously tripping out over the gnarly scene, totally stunned by the sheer boldness of whoever had pulled off this whack stunt right there on the public shore. They radioed for backup immediately, knowing this was way above their pay grade, a major league case that was going to need the big guns to crack it open. They definitely had a certified head-scratcher on their hands right now. What kind of monster could do something so cold-hearted? The lead detective, a seriously old-school guy named Sergeant Rex, rolled up on the scene, looking totally poed that his chill afternoon was completely nuked by this messed-up call. He took a long, hard look at the two grim pieces of luggage, sensing immediately that this was no simple one-off crime, but a carefully planned, sinister move. Rex knew he was diving headfirst into a seriously nasty investigation, a true deep dive into the ugly side of humanity. Would this case totally break him? Forensics showed up, a team of seriously sharp folks ready to do the nitty-gritty work, carefully setting up their gear around the two macabre finds on the sand. They were meticulously dusting for prints and bagging any telltale evidence, working like a well-oiled machine to make sure nothing crucial got totally blown or botched by the wind or the waves. The medical examiner, looking decidedly queasy, approached the open suitcase for a closer look. What disturbing details would the M.E. uncover first? The initial examination of the first victim suggested a seriously vicious attack, the kind of brutal violence that only a truly unhinged person could pull off with such ferocity and lack of remorse. The M.E. confirmed what everyone was already thinking. The victim had been totally offed with extreme prejudice, totally gone long before they were placed inside that cramped, janky travel bag. This wasn't some random street crime, but something way more personal. Was the killer trying to send some kind of sick message? The second suitcase, once they finally got it, carefully unzipped and checked out, contained the chilling remains of a second person, doubling the already intense body count and making the case a certified nightmare for the investigators. The similarities were totally striking. Same manner of death, same kind of brutal violence. Clearly the signature of the same seriously twisted perp. Sergeant Rex felt a cold, hard knot forming in his stomach, knowing this case was about to totally blow up. Were there any more suitcases out there just waiting to be found? Rex ordered a massive, all-hands-on-deck search of the entire shoreline and the gnarly wooded areas nearby, getting every available officer and volunteer out there to scour the entire joint for any other suspect items or leftover clues. They were looking for anything out of the ordinary, anything that the perpetrator might have totally ditched during their seriously quick getaway from the locus of the crime. The clock was seriously ticking, and Rex knew that every single second was crucial. Where did the killer make their initial move? Back at the station, the forensics team was working overtime, totally amped up on coffee and the need to find a single break in this seriously heavy case, meticulously processing every tiny iota of evidence they had carefully collected. They were poring over the fibers, the grime, the few janky hairs found inside the waterlogged luggage, desperately seeking that one crucial piece of data that could totally crack the whole thing wide open. They finally got a hit on something weird stuck to the zipper of the first case. What freaky stuff did the lab identify? The lab guys discovered a trace amount of a seriously odd chemical compound on the metal of the zipper, something that definitely wasn't typical and totally jumped out at them on the spectrometer. suggesting a seriously niche source. This rare substance turned out to be used only in a very few specialized, high-end industrial cleaners, the kind of stuff only wholesalers and big companies would even have access to in huge, bulky drums. This odd clue was the first real piece of the puzzle that made any kind of sense. Which industrial zone was about to get a knock on the door? Sergeant Rex felt a sudden surge of excitement, realizing this strange chemical was the one silver bullet they needed to get this show on the road and put an end to the sick game that had begun, a total game changer. They immediately launched a full-scale major league investigation into every single supplier and every single big-time purchaser of that very specific, rare industrial cleaner, creating a massive, gnarly list of possible locations. Rex knew they had to work fast before the trail went totally cold. Would the killers strike again while they were chasing down this lead? The list they compiled was seriously long and totally daunting, full of tons of janky addresses and hundreds of potential dead ends, a real drag for the already overworked police force who were feeling seriously burnt out. They started the process of grinding through the list, checking every single warehouse and every single factory, running into tons of lame paperwork and even more shady security guards along the way who didn't want to cooperate. They were looking for any place that had some kind of off-kilter vibe or seemed even slightly out of the ordinary. Were they about to stumble onto the killer's lair? Meanwhile, the two victims were finally identified. Two young women who were roomies and had gone totally missing from a downtown apartment about 2 weeks before the grim beach discovery. A seriously chilling timeline that made the cops realize they had a cold-blooded predator on their hands. Their apartment was found totally clean, wiped totally sterile of any useful evidence, suggesting the killer was seriously meticulous and a total control freak, the kind of perp who knew exactly what they were doing. The missing persons case was now a full-blown homicide investigation. Did the killer know the victims? The investigation zeroed in on the last known hangout of the victims, a swanky little bar downtown where they liked to kick back and totally chill on the weekends, a place known for its seriously sketchy clientele and even shadier back alleys. Detectives hit the bar, trying to suss out any info from the seriously lame bartender and the few scruffy regulars who were already totally wasted at the early hour of the day. They got a break when a gossipy waitress remembered seeing the girls talking to a weird dude. What did this mystery man look like? The waitress described the man as seriously creepy, with a total air of smarmy confidence and a pair of eyes that were totally dead and devoid of any kind of soul or normal human emotion, giving her seriously bad vibes immediately. He was dressed in clothes that were a little too pristine and a little too sharp for the kind of grungy bar they were currently chilling in, suggesting he was seriously well off and a total phony. The waitress distinctly recalled that he kept talking about his big-time job in the industrial district. Did this guy match up with the chemical lead? Rex immediately pulled up the list of suspects and addresses from the chemical lead, cross-referencing every single business owner and every single employee who had access to that highly specialized cleaning solution, looking for anyone who matched the smarmy description. There was one name that totally jumped out at him on the list, a seriously well-connected industrial manager who owned a whole bunch of storage facilities and who had a seriously sketchy past. Rex felt the heat rising. They were finally getting close. Was the killer's name about to be called? The manager's name was Leonard, a seriously slick guy who definitely fit the smarmy description to a T, and who had an industrial-size warehouse that was conveniently located right near the ocean, a seriously juicy detail that could be the smoking gun. Rex and a team of hardcore officers immediately got ready to roll out and pay a visit to Leonard's main gig. A seriously intense move they knew had to be totally low-key, so as not to spook the perp into making a break for it. They were about to bust the guy's chops and shut down the whole racket. What kind of hellhole were they about to walk into? The squad cars silently rolled up on Leonard's huge, creepy warehouse, the massive building looming like a total beast in the seriously gnarly industrial park, totally dead quiet except for the wind. The place looked totally forsaken, like nobody had been there in forever. But Rex knew better than to trust the lame exterior, sensing a serious vibe that something was way off and totally suspect. They all took up their positions, moving with total military precision, getting ready to make their big move. Was Leonard inside, totally chill and unaware of their presence? Rex gave the prearranged signal, a quick, sharp nod to his lead lieutenant, and the heavily armed team immediately went all systems go, totally busting down the huge, rusty back door with a thunderous, ear-splitting crash that echoed through the totally empty space. They stormed the joint with their guns fully drawn and totally ready to go, their hearts pounding like a jackhammer against their bulletproof vests. They were prepared for a seriously rough-and-tumble fight right then and there. What kind of booby traps did the psycho set up? The massive warehouse floor was totally sprawling and surprisingly neat, a weirdly organized space filled with rows and rows of huge, tall crates and totally stacked pallets of assorted junk and industrial crap, an eerie scene. There was a seriously faint smell of that same whack chemical, mixed with something else vile and metallic, a sickening aroma that made the cops realize they were absolutely in the right place after all the hassle. Rex caught sight of a little dark room hidden right in the back. What kind of hell was waiting in that tiny space? They moved like lightning towards that dark, shady room, the officers totally pumped up and ready for whatever seriously messed up confrontation was waiting for them right behind that flimsy metal door, their adrenaline completely raging. Rex kicked the door in with a monstrous effort, totally blasting it open, revealing a small, cramped office that looked like a total disaster area, with papers totally strewn everywhere. But the room was totally empty. No Leonard, no bad guy in sight, only the heavy silence. Did the sleazeball totally skip town? One of the younger cops, totally bummed out by the empty room, started checking behind the janky desk, hoping to find some kind of clue or maybe a stash of weapons, feeling like this was a total bust after all that build-up and hype. He noticed a loose floorboard that looked slightly out of place right near the edge of the grimy wall, a tiny, almost unnoticeable detail that totally jumped out at him in the sudden silence. He called Rex over, his voice totally shaky and tight with anticipation. Was this the secret hideout they were looking for? Rex immediately crouched down, his huge, calloused hand feeling around the rough edges of the slightly raised wood, realizing this wasn't just some old damage, but a totally hidden panel to something seriously shady below. With a strong, grueling tug and a loud, screeching sound of aged metal against the concrete, the whole section of the floor suddenly gave way, revealing a seriously steep and completely dark set of old creaky steps leading down into an even deeper abyss. Was Leonard holed up down in that black pit? The air that totally wafted up from the deep hole was seriously stale and had a strong, potent mix of that weird chemical scent mixed with something seriously nasty and utterly vile, making the cops gag and immediately cover their noses with their sleeves. Rex shone his super powerful tactical flashlight down the seriously steep stairwell, the single bright beam totally piercing the heavy darkness, illuminating a weirdly finished-looking basement. He could totally hear the very faint sound of a jukebox playing some seriously old-school rock and roll. Why was this freak listening to music? Rex knew he had to totally take the plunge first, no matter how seriously sketchy that descent looked, or how weird the whole situation was already becoming, knowing he had to face off against the nutjob who was responsible for the horrific suitcases. He motioned for his team to stay put and totally cover him from above, took a deep, shaky breath, and began his slow, deliberate descent down the janky steps, his flashlight cutting through the heavy gloom. He was seriously alone down in that darkness. What was Leonard doing at the bottom? The basement was a total trip, way bigger than it had any right to be, looking totally fixed up with plush carpet and weird off-kilter decor that gave the whole joint a seriously creepy vibe, like a twisted bachelor pad. In the center of the huge room, totally chilling and completely unconcerned by the noisy raid going on upstairs, sat Leonard, looking totally calm and totally relaxed in a comfy lazy-boy chair, sipping something that looked like a martini. Rex's pulse was absolutely hammering in his ears right then. Was this dude seriously waiting for them? Leonard slowly turned his sleazy head, a seriously smarmy and totally unsettling grin spreading across his tight face, his dead eyes totally locking onto Rex, not showing a single iota of surprise or fear at the sight of the fully armed officer. "Well, shiver me timbers," Leonard totally drawled, his voice smooth but totally chilling. "Look what the cat dragged in. You're a little behind the curve, aren't you, Flatfoot?" He took another long, leisurely sip of his booze, a total display of nerve. Was Leonard totally unarmed? Rex held his bad boy pistol steady and totally level, pointing it directly at Leonard's smug face, his voice coming out in a sharp, rough command that cut through the lame music, telling the perp to immediately drop the glass. Leonard simply chuckled, a seriously sickening and unpleasant sound that totally crawled under Rex's skin, making his hackles seriously rise, refusing to totally budge an inch or show any kind of compliance. He raised his glass in a taunting salute to the seriously tense detective. Was this game playing about to cost Leonard his life? "You think you're really all that now, don't you, buddy?" Leonard casually taunted, his voice dripping with total sarcasm and absolutely zero respect for the authority standing right there with a loaded weapon, totally daring the cop to make a move right now. He totally dropped the pretense of being cooperative, a cold, hard edge entering his voice that totally revealed the real monster lurking underneath the smarmy surface, making the whole joint feel way more dangerous. Rex knew this guy was seriously bad news and totally unpredictable. Could Rex totally take this guy alive? The detective, seriously fed up with Leonard's whole lame act and his constant taunting, took a cautious, deliberate step forward, ready to totally close the distance and physically apprehend the nut job, figuring the guy was just a big mouth and a total coward deep down inside. But Leonard suddenly smirked, a wicked flash in his eyes, and, with a surprisingly quick motion, he totally slammed his martini glass right down onto the sturdy armrest of his chair, totally shattering the glass into a million tiny pieces. What was Leonard hiding under the chair, right beneath the armrest, now totally exposed by the suddenly shattered glass, was a tiny, easily accessible red button, totally wired into the wall behind Leonard's head, looking seriously ominous in the dull light of the basement. Leonard leaned forward, his eyes totally glinting with pure, unadulterated malice, his whole demeanor totally shifting from smarmy to seriously psychotic in a total split second, a true head trip. Rex felt a sudden, sickening sense of total dread wash over him as he saw the perp's hand slowly move towards the button. What the heck did that little device control? Leonard gave one last evil grin that totally stretched his face and made him look completely insane, his eyes now totally wild and full of seriously twisted excitement, totally relishing the immediate terror he saw reflected in the cop's hard face. Before Rex could even totally yell out a final command or even squeeze the trigger on his heavy pistol, Leonard's fingers totally slammed down onto the red button with a loud, sickening thud. What devastating surprise had the killer unleashed? The moment Leonard totally slammed that freaking button, a super loud, blaring alarm immediately started to absolutely scream through the entire huge warehouse, the piercing sound totally shattering the tense silence with a massive, ugly jolt. Rex immediately heard his fellow officers yelling and totally freaking out upstairs, their voices muffled but clearly full of serious distress and instant confusion. Leonard just sat there, looking totally smug and chillin', like he had just won a major jackpot. What kind of hellish defense mechanism was now active? Suddenly, a thick, choking plume of seriously dense smoke instantly began to totally billow out from multiple hidden vents along the ceiling, immediately filling the whole joint with a seriously putrid and acrid-smelling vapor that made it impossible to even see or totally breathe down in the basement. Rex was immediately totally blindsided by the sudden cloud, frantically coughing and gagging as the nasty fumes instantly began to totally burn his lungs and make his eyes seriously water up. He realized he was now totally separated from Leonard in the haze. Was this smoke totally lethal? Rex immediately bellowed a desperate command into his radio, trying to totally warn the fuzz upstairs about the seriously whack gas. But the sudden loud static totally screaming back at him confirmed that the sick bastard had totally jammed all their communication channels immediately. He knew he had only a very few precious moments before the noxious fumes completely overwhelmed him, making his head feel seriously lightheaded and woozy. He had to totally take down the perp, and he had to do it pronto. Where did the nut job totally vanish to? Through the incredibly thick and disorienting haze, Rex just barely caught a quick, faint glimpse of Leonard's sleazy silhouette, totally darting toward a small, hidden door that was totally camouflaged in the dark paneling right behind the seriously gnarly jukebox in the corner. Rex immediately bolted after him, not even giving a single thought to the seriously freaky air he was inhaling, or the tight burning sensation in his chest, totally focused on the target. He lunged through the swirling vapor, totally desperate to catch up. Was this his only shot at getting the killer? He totally slammed into the small, hidden doorway, almost immediately bumbling right through the narrow opening, finding himself in a seriously cramped and ridiculously tight hallway that was clearly a total secret passage, feeling more like a tunnel than a normal escape route. He could totally hear Leonard's seriously quick and scrambling footsteps immediately echoing ahead of him in the heavy total darkness, a sure sign that the perp was totally booking it and getting the heck out of the joint. Rex pulled out his sidearm and totally pressed on, his heart seriously pounding. Where did this shady passage lead? The cramped, claustrophobic passage suddenly totally opened up into a huge, vast, and seriously echoing underground chamber that smelled overwhelmingly of rotting fish and seriously stagnant water, making Rex realize they were now totally beneath the nearby coastline. The whole chamber was totally lit by a single, seriously flickering bare bulb that hung from the grimy ceiling, casting incredibly long and seriously distorted shadows everywhere on the wet walls. Leonard was standing right in the center of the huge, eerie room, looking totally triumphant. Did the perp have another trick up his sleeve? In Leonard's totally sleazy hands, Rex immediately spotted a small, shiny remote control that looked seriously techy and totally complicated, the sick bastard immediately raising it high above his freaky head in a grand, dramatic gesture of absolute defiance and total victory. "You're seriously too late, copper," Leonard totally screamed, his voice totally bouncing off the seriously damp concrete walls with a seriously chilling and maniacal quality that totally rattled the detective. Rex felt a sudden massive surge of ice-cold dread slamming into his guts. What kind of hellish trap was Leonard about to spring? With a final, totally wicked and maniacal laugh that sounded totally unhinged and completely off the rails, Leonard immediately slammed a different, much bigger button on the seriously nasty remote control, and the entire huge underground chamber immediately began to shake and seriously tremble with a massive, violent intensity, the sound of seriously grinding gears immediately screaming into Rex's ears. Huge, gushing torrents of cold, heavy water immediately began to totally stream in through massive, newly opened vents along the seriously damp walls. The entire joint was now totally flooding. Could Rex get out of the chamber in time? Rex knew he had only a very tight window of opportunity to totally stop the nut job before the rapidly rising water completely swallowed the whole terrifying chamber and totally trapped them both down in the seriously gnarly abyss, sealing their fate forever. He immediately lunged forward with a huge, totally desperate leap, totally charging across the huge, slippery concrete floor, his boots totally sloshing through the fast-moving, icy cold water that was already swirling around his ankles. Leonard, totally cackling with malicious glee, totally turned tail and ran towards a shadowy, dark tunnel. Was this the killer's final escape route? Rex fired his heavy sidearm pistol, the single, loud shot totally reverberating like a massive thunderclap in the huge echoing space, the bullet instantly ricocheting harmlessly off the seriously damp concrete wall right near Leonard's ducking head, just barely missing the sleazeball by a seriously tight margin. Leonard didn't even totally flinch or slow his seriously fast pace, totally scrambling like a frightened rat into the dark, narrow escape tunnel, totally vanishing from Rex's rapidly closing sight. Rex knew he was totally losing his target. Should Rex follow the killer into the dark? The rising, frigid water was already totally sloshing right above Rex's knees, making it seriously hard to totally move, and totally hampering his pursuit of the seriously quick perp. A serious handicap he definitely did not need right now in this seriously life-or-death situation. He finally reached the mouth of the narrow, pitch-dark escape tunnel, instantly realizing that it was totally too small for him to totally fit through, while still wearing his bulky, heavy tactical gear and his vest. He immediately began to furiously rip off his equipment. Would he totally drown before he caught the maniac? As Rex immediately shucked off his heavy waterlogged gear, totally desperate to save his own bacon and totally hell-bent on catching the creep, he caught a quick, final, faint glimpse of something seriously shiny and completely metallic, hanging right on the wet concrete wall right next to the entrance of the dark tunnel. A tiny detail in the huge, chaotic scene. It was a seriously heavy-duty nautical lever, clearly intended to totally control the huge sluice gate that was now actively flooding the terrifying chamber. Rex was instantly frozen by a horrible choice. Should he chase Leonard or save his buddies? Rex's mind was totally racing like a super-fast locomotive, trying to totally process the horrific choice and the seriously high stakes of the seriously gnarly situation, knowing that his buddies upstairs were possibly totally trapped in the smoke and maybe even drowning right now, all because of the psycho's final sick move. He knew he totally couldn't let Leonard totally get away with this seriously vile and utterly horrific crime, but he totally couldn't let his team down either, not with their lives on the line. He totally ignored the escape tunnel. He immediately grabbed the cold lever. What would happen when he pulled it? With a final, seriously intense roar of determination and a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline that totally flowed through his veins, Rex immediately grabbed that cold metal lever and totally yanked it with a massive, monstrous effort, totally slamming it down into the off position with a huge, grating, screeching sound of seriously grinding metal against metal. The immediate, gushing flow of the frigid, heavy water immediately began to slow down almost instantly, but the whole huge chamber was already totally half full, and the sudden change in pressure was immediate and seriously dramatic. The single, flickering light bulb immediately sizzled out and totally died. Was he now totally blind and trapped in the dark? The complete, heavy darkness was immediately absolute, totally swallowing Rex whole and totally engulfing him in the terrifying, frigid water and the seriously sickening silence, a complete, chilling sensory deprivation that instantly made his heart jump into his throat with total, raw fear. He totally lost his bearings immediately, struggling to totally orient himself in the huge, inundated chamber, realizing he had totally sacrificed his one chance to catch the nut job to save his pals. He could just barely make out the faint sound of a hatch totally clanging shut somewhere way off in the distance. Was Leonard now totally gone forever? You got it. I'll regenerate the ending, condensing the final action and resolution into exactly 4 paragraphs, while keeping the high-stakes American slang, active voice, and the killer cliffhanger tradition rolling right up to the very last word. Rex immediately scrambled through the totally inundated darkness, immediately thrashing through the sloshing water that was now up to his chest, totally desperate to find the narrow, dark escape tunnel that Leonard had totally booked it through, his lungs seriously screaming for some fresh air. Just as total, sheer panic immediately slammed into his guts, he heard a huge, loud commotion and some serious banging coming from the ceiling way above him, a sound that totally pierced the heavy, eerie silence of the submerged chamber. The heavy metal cover finally buckled under the massive, seriously intense pressure and the sheer brute force of the determined cops. Was the nutjob's escape tunnel now totally blocked by the cops? His fellow officers immediately pulled Rex up and out of the frigid water, totally wiped out, but seriously fizzing with total adrenaline, only to find the escape tunnel totally sealed from the other side, making the perp's getaway totally final and complete. A major bust for the whole squad. Rex immediately surveyed the damage, totally shaking off the chilling water and his massive, raw disappointment, totally furious that the sleazeball had totally finessed their massive raid and made them all look like complete doofuses. They immediately launched a massive, all-out manhunt for Leonard, totally scouring the whole industrial area and every single nook and cranny nearby. Did the psycho already have a secret ride waiting to whisk him away? The subsequent investigation immediately kicked off into seriously high gear, totally shifting its focus to totally uncovering the full vile scope of Leonard's whole operation and the extent of his seriously twisted mind, a whole new level of whackness for the whole city to totally freak out about. Rex went to the victims' distraught, seriously freaked out families, totally vowing to them that he would totally hound Leonard to the ends of the earth. He would never rest until the seriously sick bastard was finally cuffed and totally brought to justice for his seriously cold-blooded crimes. Leonard became the most wanted man in the country overnight. Could Rex ever fulfill his heavy promise to the grieving families? The massive, frantic search efforts totally fizzled out after a seriously intense few weeks of total, fruitless searching, with Leonard totally vanishing without leaving a single trace or any leads for the frustrated police, making the whole situation a total dead end for the time being. The Suitcase murders immediately became a totally chilling urban legend, a seriously creepy story whispered in totally hushed tones, a horrifying reminder of the one big fish that totally got away from the fuzz and the terrifying possibility: is Leonard the sleazeball plotting his next move?